The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, January 28th, Blessed Julian Maunoir. It cannot be said that Catholics of other nations are ignorant of the religious history of France in the 17th century, but it is undoubtedly true that one of the least known aspects of that history is the work of missionaries in the interior of the country. Everyone is aware of the activities of a Monsieur Ollier in Paris or of a Saint Vincent throughout France, but much less known are the activities of a Saint John Eudes in Normandy, of a Saint Pierre Fourier in Lorraine, of a Father Jean Lejeune in Limousin, Languedoc, and Provence, of a Saint Jean-François de Régy in Velay and Vivarais, and in general of all the missions of Brittany. However, according to Henri Breton, the latter were the most fruitful of all, and certainly the most picturesque. Among the missionaries of Brittany, the Benedictine Miguel Lenoblet's and Father Julian Maunoir stand out. The latter was born in the Diocese of Reims in 1606 and entered the Society of Jesus in 1625. No doubt the impiety and barbarism of the Bretons of that time and the negligence of their clergy have been exaggerated, but that does not detract from the fact that they were extremely superstitious, brutal, turbulent, and at the same time very open to the gospel message. The region that produced so many quarrelsome pirates was also the land of Armel Nicholas, and of the Baroque Calvaries and statues of Lower Brittany. The mystics opened the way for the missionaries. Bernard, S.J., and Dom Lenoblet's attracted the attention of Julian Maunoir to this field and advised him to learn the Breton language. Father Maunoir mastered it in a very short time. There are certain analogies between Catholic Brittany and the Protestant regions of Wales and Cornwall. Regarding the Breton missions, Henri Breton uses the English word revival and mentions Bunyan and Pilgrim's Progress. The Anglican historian of the Cornwall missions, the late Canon Gilbert Doble, entitled his short biography of Julian Maunoir, the John Wesley of Brittany. The comparison between the biography of Father Maunoir, written by Séjourne, and the diary of John Wesley is very instructive, as is the comparison between this diary and that of Blessed Julian Maunoir. When Father Maunoir began to work in Brittany in 1640, there were only 2 other missionaries. At his death, 43 years later, there were more than 1,000. Renan would later complain that his ancestors had been Jesuitized and denationalized by missionaries from other regions of France. The reality is that there were only a handful of Jesuits, most of whom were Bretons, and a strong contingent of Breton clergy who cooperated with the fathers of the society and spontaneously submitted to the rigorous discipline imposed on them by Father Maunoir. Moreover, the technique of missionary work had been devised by a non-Jesuit Breton, Michael Lenoblet's, who has been called the last of the bards. The task consisted first and foremost in religious instruction. Emotional preaching, capable of sweeping the crowds at a moment's notice, was employed only as a secondary instrument. The missionaries were aided in their task by color pictures, some of which are still preserved in the library of Quimper. These were illustrations of the Passion, the Lord's Prayer, the deadly sins, etc., under the different allegories of the knight-errant, the 6 cities of refuge, the 3 trees. In this way, the popular imagination and the poetic qualities of the human spirit were awakened. The images, the vividness, and the sense of humor of the comments made by the missionaries is what made Henri Breton think of Bunyan. But in addition, there were representations with living plastic pictures. From this originated the famous processions in which, for example, the Passion of the Lord was represented. Father Maunoir preached and the actors incarnated his word, while the listeners sobbed with emotion. Some complained about the emotionality of such acts, but the Breton bishops supported the missionary. Another method was the use of religious songs, some of which were already traditional, and others had been composed by Father Maunoir himself. Probably only one has remained to us as he wrote it, and it must be confessed that in the translation from Breton into French, it loses much of its original grace. What is certain is that Julian had the gift of versifying with great feeling, and that religious canticles constituted an important factor in the Breton missions. To the use of the local language was added devotion to the Breton saints of antiquity. The region of St. Corentin in the Diocese of Quimper was Father Maunoir's favorite field. As the legend of the Celtic saints is full of miracles, some of them moving, others fantastic, and even less edifying among the really convincing. So the evangelization carried out by Julian was supported by numerous miracles and prodigies. Bosché, S.J., who wrote the first biography of the Blessed in 1697, had studied an account of his miracles. His comment was as follows: "They seemed to me so extraordinary that I could not but suspect that the author had exaggerated the reality in order to glorify the servant of God." Bosché's skepticism diminished greatly. Why be surprised that the renewal of Christianity in Brittany was confirmed by miracles similar to those that accompanied its introduction into the world? From the human point of view, Father Maunoir was not particularly intelligent and had a certain tendency to credulity, but he was at the same time a true leader who made himself obeyed, a first-class organizer, and a man of great vision. A good part of the success of his missions is due to the fact that he directed them to the shepherds as well as to the sheep. The pointer to comment on the images became the distinctive weapon of his missionaries and a symbol of the finger pointing the way. During the spiritual exercises that preceded his ordination, Julian de Maunoir wrote, having just received communion, "I felt an extraordinary zeal for the salvation of souls and a great desire to work for them with all possible means. The voice of the Lord repeated in my heart, 'I worked, I wept, I suffered, and I died for them.'" These words sum up Julian's life. After his death, which occurred at Pleven de Cornouailles on January 28, 1683, pilgrims flocked to kiss those feet that had traveled throughout Brittany and carried the gospel message to its last corners. He was beatified by Pius XII on May 20, 1951.